Hello everybody and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and I want to thank you guys for joining me for a breakdown for the Sons of Feanor faction. Now keep in mind that the nitty-gritty details, such as who has what amount of melee defense, etc., is going to fluctuate throughout our alpha process. However, I don't mind talking a little bit about the faction, about its concept, and about some of the odds and ends that we're adding to the alpha build and to Silmarillion Total War in general. And also, please ignore the 33 Forge thing spinning in the back there. I am basing the alpha build for Silmarillion Total War on an older version of the 0.97 test build, simply because it's expedient for me to do so. There's a lot of things on there that I want to use. Custom projectiles that I made for 0.97, weapon length, so the dynamic between halberds and pikes in terms of their attack range is unchanged, etc., so it's just easier for me. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the Sons of Feanor. They are the elder house of the Noldor of Beleriand. Their namesake, Feanor, was the eldest son of Finwë, the High King, the original High King, at least of the Noldor, of all Noldor everywhere. And Feanor eventually traveled down a very sad path towards his defeat. Shortly after arriving back in Beleriand and betraying his brother and slaughtering the Teleri, Feanor was unfortunately killed by Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs. But his house and his sons lived on, and that is exactly who we're going to see today. So the Sons of Feanor field exceptional cavalry. Their cavalry is excellent. In a mod where not everyone is going to have access to cavalry, and certainly not to the large numbers of cavalry that the Sons of Feanor can field, that is certainly a big plus to have. In addition, all of their units are quite well armored, with the exception of some of their Edain, but all of their Noldor units are very well armored, and many of their Noldor infantry can also upgrade their armor, which again is a feature that is quite thin on the ground in terms of factions in Silmarillion Total War, speaking generally. Their weaknesses: their infantry units are low in number. All of their infantry suffer a -20 penalty. For a couple of reasons. One, because the Sons of Feanor commanded the least amount of Noldor. I mean, I'm sure you can have very long, lengthy discussions about the demographics and the amount of Sindar in the territory controlled by the Sons of Feanor, which, at least in terms of sheer geographical size, was quite substantial. But whether or not people would fight for this house of essentially kinslayers, and eventually they were outed as such, and the least popular, shall we say, of the houses of the Noldor, I've decided to add that in just to represent that aspect and to make them a little bit more reliant on their cavalry and make their infantry, despite the fact that its quality is quite high, as you would expect from Noldor. Their infantry is more of a holding force than anything else, so serves a dual purpose there of both representing the story well on the battlefield in a practical, meaningful way, and also playing into the playstyle and helping to specialize that faction. So yeah, the infantry is low in number, and they also lack armor-piercing units and pole arms. That is not to say that they have no armor-piercing whatsoever. Of course, these Sons of Feanor have access to a large number of cavalry, at least 2 of which are lancers, which have an armor-piercing charge. They've got some javelin men as well, brought to them by the Edain, and they've also got some light infantry that have some armor piercing, but it's not like large quality or large quantities of armor piercing, and the units that do actually have this is more than just a projectile or is more than just a charge, which are very contextual or very limited. The Thargelion stalkers are a light infantry unit. They're a low tier light infantry unit, so they're more of a supporting unit rather than something that you want to place onto your front line unsupported. But let's move on here and take a look at their roster, and I can talk about all of the units in turn. Now, if you guys have seen the last few videos on Silmarillion Total War, then the half-strength units here are going to make complete sense to you. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time, or who haven't seen those videos just yet, then I will explain a little bit about why there are some half-strength duplicate units here. Now, the Stalkers of Thargelion, who I talked about earlier, are going to have a half-strength unit, as will the Mounted Company of Curufin. Most factions are going to have unmounted detachment units, but the Sons of Feanor, being a cavalry specialized faction, will have access to both. So they're going to have some utility here in the form of the armor-piercing infantrymen of the Stalkers of Thargelion, which are quite cheap to bring. And they've also got some mounted company of Kurufin and the Riders of the Past, just to fill out their cavalry line a little bit further. Now, this is the detachment system. What I've decided to do with this is give players access to half-strength units for half the cost. So if you fill out a faction, or you fill out an army composition, and you've got, I don't know, 500 florins left, the cheapest unit for Sons of Feanor otherwise is about 630 gold. You're not going to be able to spend all of that on armor upgrades. Maybe you can throw in some chevrons, but it doesn't feel as interesting to just give your units some superficial upgrades, which you're not going to see like visually, well, in the case of weapon upgrades at least, you're not going to see visually represented on the battlefield. So this is there to open that up and to open up some more compositions. As you've probably noticed, the factions are a little bit smaller, and I'm sort of going for more of an approach that brings together a smaller number of units, each unit having its place, each unit being useful in its own way in specific contexts, rather than having a ton of units and maybe you say you've got 30 units, maybe you only use 15 or maybe you only use 20 and the rest is just kind of dead weight. And then you're constantly trying to play catch up, so, and make the unused units more useful, and it just ends up being a nightmare because you're constantly fluctuating in trying to make something more useful when really the issue is that you've just got too much stuff. So I've amalgamated the rosters, made them a little bit smaller, and the detachment system is there to make sure that you can spend all your gold, and you can spend all your gold in a meaningful way that opens up additional compositions and additional utility for your faction. So it's not just going to be, 2 builds or something because you've only got so many units. You do have some options here in terms of what you can bring and when. So yeah, this is the detachment system. But let's take a look at some of their individual units here. So Stalkers of Thargelion have a 5 missile damage javelin. It is not armor piercing, and partially that's to draw a meaningful distinction between the Rangers of Hellevorn, who do have an armor piercing missile with extra damage, and the Stalkers of Thargelion. They're only armor piercing in close quarters with their axes, which is more of a utility change, just so they can compete against Angband, who has quite a lot of heavily armored units, especially on their mid-tier lineup, who can also upgrade their armor, so making them even tankier. So the Stalkers of Thargelion are an excellent answer to that, and their missile is going to be quite useful against the large numbers of light and medium infantry that are in the game, because heavy infantry along the lines of Angband or the Footmen of Maedhros, who can upgrade to 12 armor, which is very substantial and have very high shield values, that is the exception rather than the rule in Silmarillion Total War. We're on a little bit of a lower technology level, so things like crossbows and advanced armor upgrades, things like that, are all only available to a certain number of factions. These factions are a little bit more specialized, and the differences between them are accentuated. And I'd like to think that that's been done in some meaningful ways that gives everybody an identity and gives each unit a role on the battlefield, regardless of tier and cost and things like that. So yeah, Stalkers of Thargelion, excellent little utility unit. They've got a decent charge value as well, and you can upgrade their attack. So +2, it says 6, but it actually gives you more like 7. So the charge value ends up being 11. So once you use their missile, which is not hard to do, they've only got 2. They're more of a hybrid unit rather than a dedicated skirmisher, so their ammunition is a little bit lower as well. Then they make decent throwaway shock infantry with that 11 damage, especially against lower end. There's not technically a low tier elven unit in the game. They all start at about mid tier to lower mid tier. But against certain lower tier or lower mid tier elven units and the orcish units, this is going to be excellent, since the orcish units tend to hover at about, the line units tend to be about 2 to 5 melee defense. So with the 7 attack and with that decent charge bonus, the Stalkers of Thargelion can actually be very effective at combating heavily armored orcish infantry, and they lend some numbers to what would otherwise be almost a skeleton crew on the Sons of Feanor front line. So very useful unit there, and they also have a you can bring a couple extra ones that equal to a full other unit as a detachment. So it's a little bit extra utility there for the Sons of Feanor, because the Stalkers of Thargelion, in my opinion, despite being a low tier unit, are quite important for the Sons of Feanor when it comes to an infantry fight. Next we have the Footmen of Maedhros, and yeah, a very, very good infantry unit. They've got very high morale, with a morale of 17. You can upgrade their armor, give them very, very substantial boosts, and that in tandem with their high shield value does make them quite tanky. They're a little bit lower on the melee defense side of things than some other elven units of a similar nature that you're going to see later on. In particular, Fingolfin's faction are going to kind of shift this dynamic around a little bit. So the Sons of Feanor are heavier on armor, so armor piercing is better against them. Whereas the House of Fingolfin are going to be heavier on their melee defense and lighter on their armor and their shield values. So missiles will be more appropriate to use against them en masse. So certain units within other factions aren't going to be particularly useful against the House of Feanor, in particular the Footmen of Maedhros. So bowmen are a little bit lower on damage since shield and armor values have gone down across the board. And they're not going to be of much use against the House of Feanor, who are just so well armored. But against other factions like the House of Fingolfin, that's going to be a little bit of a different story one. So yeah, very good morale response, very high morale, extremely tanky unit, and believe it or not, it's only a mid-tier, an upper mid-tier at least, Elven Swords unit. So quite strong. I've seen them in every single army that anyone has brought. They are the quintessential line infantry unit for the Sons of Feanor. Absolutely a necessary unit. Although I haven't really experimented with not bringing them. I mean, you know, maybe you can do something a little bit differently if you wanted to. Next we have the Shield Bearers of Celegorm, which is our second Edain unit. So this is Edain from the House of Halath, as they all are. And they're a little bit heavier. These are a medium infantry unit, so you can see that their speed is a little bit higher. You'll notice that there is some differences between the speed of heavy and medium, and indeed light infantry. So these guys are going to be 1.1, which makes them a whole 0.5 faster than the Sons of Feanor, which is actually significant. It doesn't sound like much, but it is very noticeable. Think the Dwarves and Reforged. The only difference between their speed and other factions is about 0.5. It's the same difference between the light and the heavy infantry, so it is meaningful. The Shield Bearers of Celegorm can also upgrade their armor, bringing them to a total of 8. They've got really good melee skill, as you can see there. Their attack is far, far lower. And I actually found an interesting little quirk that I've recently added to Silmarillion Total War, is that there are types of damage that do even better. So you can, against spear units, so you can accentuate the differences even further between units that are non-spear versus those that are. So they have attack value of 5, which is far lower, but really high melee skill. So it's going to help them stay alive, help them do their job of holding the line or being a threat to cavalry with their extra speed there. But they're not going to be a killing machine, so that's going to have to be focused elsewhere, such as in the Defenders of Agalon. Now, quite small, but you can upgrade them to be very, very scary indeed. It does cost quite a lot, but the Defenders of Agalon will almost never let you down. Very, very high morale. Great speed, as Shock Infantry have a bit of a different speed schema that they use. So these guys are going to be faster than your average heavy infantry, meaning you can get them into place, get that charge bonus off a little bit easier. And yeah, still high melee defense, decent skill there. The melee defense is about 12. Not as high as some other units that you're going to see in the game, but their armor value is really the big draw here. So 11 armor plus an extra 2. Makes them very tanky indeed. 13 armor, most units are never going to get anywhere near that. And very high charge value as well. And then we get into one of our General's Bodyguard units for the Sons of Feanor. These are the Otorn Maedhros. Maedhros being, I believe Maedhim is the father name for Maedhros, which is Maedhros. The name for the eldest son of Feanor is actually a Sindarin translation of his Quenya name. A little lore tidbit is that after the kinslaying came to light, Thingol, who was kind of the overlord of most of Beleriand, actually outlawed the use of Quenya, which is the Noldor's mother tongue, under pain of death. So they switched over to Sindarin, which is why you're going to see names like Maedhros instead of Maedhros. But yeah, so Otorn Maedhros are the Oath Sworn of Maedhros, which is a really cool name. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the Oath of the Sons of Feanor. For those of you that aren't, after the Silmarils were stolen and Finwë was murdered by Morgoth, the Sons of Feanor swore a very terrible oath that would haunt them throughout the First Age to recover the Silmarils at any cost, no matter who stands in their way, and that brings them into conflict with even some of their own elven brethren. So yeah, these are the Oathsworn of Maedhros. Very, very scary indeed. You can upgrade their armor, giving them 12 armor, or rather 14 armor in total. Very, very strong. This is an extremely tanky unit, which I think is appropriate given how few in number they are. And yeah, it's excellent. It gives a small morale buff to units nearby, so that's going to bring units like the Defenders of Aglon to 21, Footmen of Maedhros to 20, which makes them extremely hard to run off the field. Nigh on impossible, and this unit itself has very good morale in addition. But yeah, excellent unit, the Oathsworn Maedhros. Moving on now, we have the Huntsmen of Thargelion. The Huntsmen are an interesting little hybrid unit. So you can see that they have a bonus fighting against cavalry, and the little staff across their back there is actually a two-handed spear. Now, two-handed spears have kind of had their role rethought a little bit. We have a lot of formation fighting units. There are limited pikes in the game, and there's also limited halberds. And there is one faction, which I will reveal later, it's not going to happen for quite some time though, that will have access to formation fighting spear wall two-handed spears, and just so people are aware of how the mechanic works. Spear wall units from the front have multiple units or multiple ranks of their unit that attack at once, whereas normally with a regular spear unit you're only going to have the first rank attacking. Not the case with a phalanx unit, so important distinction there. But these guys don't have spear wall, but they do have two-handed spears, and a lot of units like this, kind of like guerrilla units, screen units for the Elves of Assyrion as well, are going to have a two-handed spear. And it can be a very, very nasty shock when cavalry charges in there thinking, I'm just going to run off this low-tier unit from the field, nice and quick, no problem, and then suddenly they whip out two-handed spears and start murdering your cavalry. So it is something to be aware of. It is a unit that can be used as a screen for cavalry, can be used to support them in close quarters or at range, depending on the engagements you're expecting to have. And they've got the same range that, like attack range, that halberds and other two-handed spears that you're used to in Reforged will have. Although it's far easier to surround them and to break up their formation and make that extra distance not really worth quite so much, given that they don't fight in formation, and often you're going to have your archers in loose formation in any case. But yeah, nice little hybrid unit. Certainly has its uses. You can upgrade its damage to make it even scarier against cavalry. Does open up a lot of opportunities for supporting the Sons of Feanor's excellent cavalry units. And now, we have a unit I mentioned earlier, the Rangers of Hellevorn. They do not upgrade their armor, but they do have a decent armor value of 6, good skill of 8, and a shield value of 6 as well. These guys are a skirmisher unit, and there's a few differences between, say, them and the Stalkers of Thargelion here. The biggest is their ammunition, and the second biggest, well, I guess the ammunition is probably the second biggest, but the biggest difference is the armor piercing. So these guys have more damage, they have extra ammunition, and their armor piercing, which is one of the distinctions you can draw here between these hybrid units, and it prevents a lower tier unit from kind of blurring the lines too much in terms of the usefulness of the Rangers of Hellevorn. They are very distinctly good at being armor pierce, anti-armor skirmishers that can do a lot of damage. 6 missile damage against the lower shield and armor values in the game is going to be extremely devastating. And this unit, I think, is absolutely essential for dealing with some of the larger monsters from, say, Angband, for example, or from the halberd units, which the Sons of Feanor, as I mentioned earlier, don't really have a direct and obvious answer to. The Rangers of Hellevorn do help even the odds there somewhat. And then afterwards, especially if you give them an attack upgrade, then they can have 9 damage. They're a decent medium infantry unit, so a lot of uses there. Oh yeah, and one other difference I think that you probably noticed here is that these guys get extra range too. So the Rangers of Hellevorn, perhaps appropriately given their name, get an extra 10 meters of range over the hybrid unit here, the Stalkers of Thargelion. Next we have the Archers of Amrod, which is one of the brothers of Feanor. Many of their units are named after a brother who could conceivably command them, or would want to employ them based on what we know. And they're sort of a ranged equivalent to the Footmen of Maedhros. Naturally, they lack the same armor values here. You can see they've got less armor. They don't have a shield, and they don't have as much morale as well. And their morale response, i.e. losing, 40 men out of the unit will make these guys go shaken, whereas or potentially rout, given the circumstances, whereas the Footmen of Maedhros would be able to hold on for longer and, maybe won't have that problem. So there's the distinction there between ranged units and the dedicated line melee units. That being said, the Archers of Amrod, are no joke. 8 damage, you can give them 10 right there if you want. You can also upgrade their armor. Altogether, I mean, if you wanted to bring one of these units and use it to just be irritating for enemy skirmishers and to draw a lot of fire, when they've got 11 armor, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So it's not a unit that I see get a ton of use, but I have seen it save a few people's bacon, especially since they can act as an infantry reserve once you're done with them, because regardless of the differences between them and the Footmen of Maedhros, they are still quite capable melee combatants. Now we get into the really cool units here, kind of the cream of the crop with the Sons of Feanor. We've got the Mounted Company of Curufin. This is a detachment. The normal unit is going to cost more, and it's going to be 60 men in the unit, rather. The 3 there is like banner carriers and officers and such. They are a melee cavalry Jav-Cav hybrid, and unlike the mid-tier units who don't have the highly trained trait, these guys do. So they form up better, they're more responsive, and they get an extra damage point in the system that I've created for stats to boot as well. So really good damage. You can upgrade them to give them 12 damage. I can't quite remember the stat, like the bonus templates against cavalry for the melee cavalry. I think it's 4 versus cavalry, 2 against warg units, and then 2 against elephants. So they are actually quite adept monster hunters. If you can find a unit of hydras out in the field, you can silence them and be quite confident that your Mounted Company of Curufin will do very well against them in close quarters and tie that unit down for an extended period. Yeah, they're exactly what you'd expect. They're a melee cavalry Jav-Cav hybrid. It does help the Sons of Feanor with a little bit of extra armor piercing, although again it's not a dedicated armor piercing unit. Its strengths and main utility do lie elsewhere. And then here we have the Riders of the Pass. They share the same model with the Defenders of Aglon, although you cannot upgrade their armor, but they do have a shield value as well. So when it comes to a horse archer against horse archer battle or a horse archer against foot archer battle, these guys are going to be excellent. There's very little chance for other archers to shoot them down easily. Assyrians can do it. Jav-Cav can be useful against them, but Assyrian is going to spend a lot of ammunition here trying to deal with the Riders of the Pass, and in turn they're going to be dealing back some significant damage. So a very useful unit, especially against lightly armored opponents. Tolin Gaurhoth and their wargs are certainly going to fear the Riders of the Pass, I think, quite rightly. And other elven factions like the Elves of Assyrian, or eventually perhaps even Fingolfin's elves, are going to certainly learn to fear this unit as well. It's got a lot of utility, but it is quite specialized in ranged combat, so you don't want to have these guys in close quarters for very long. Although, once they're out of ammunition, you can throw them into the back of the units and potentially cause routes if you do so at an opportune moment. Here we have the Mounted Company of Celegorm. Very much like the Elder Rinway Lancers, very high armor values, their skill is good, their shield value is excellent, not easy to take down at ranged, and their charge is also extremely high. One of the bonuses of playing as a Sons of Feanor is that you get an extra 2 damage on your charge bonus for free. It doesn't cost any extra money. It's not factored into the price at all. And Sons of Feanor Cavalry actually can upgrade for cheaper than they can upgrade their attack for cheaper. None of them can upgrade their armor, but they can upgrade their attack for a little bit cheaper. Normally it's about 30 for the Sons of Feanor, but for the Mounted Company of Celegorm it is 25, so that also helps you spend a little bit extra money at the end of the turn if you find yourself with an odd number of florins. But one important difference to note between a Lancer unit, but in Silmarillion Total War against those in Reforged, is that they're not helpless when it comes to fighting wargs. They have a penalty against elephant class units, so Hydras. I think that Hydras are currently the only one, but there will be several others added and potentially the Balrogs will revert to being an elephant unit as well. And they have a negative bonus against cavalry as well, so units that ride horses specifically. But against wargs, so wolf-mounted units, these guys have a quite large bonus of +4. So they're not completely helpless when it comes to fighting an evil faction, although against cavalry from other elven factions, or against the Easterlings and things like that, then these guys are not going to have the same advantage that they otherwise would be if those were camel units. And wargs are like a third mount type. They're classified as camels, so they get a specific you can specify bonuses against them, I think. But yeah, so Mounted Company of Celegorm, very useful, extremely devastating off the charge. The only thing they really lack is numbers, and they are quite expensive with a 1,000 gold price tag. And then we have a unit that I think many people are going to be quite familiar with. We have the Roqueni Megaloro. It's a knight unit. It's exactly what you would expect. They're a little bit smaller, but consequently they are more elite. And if you look at their skill and armor and shield values, very, very high. Not an easy unit to cut down in melee at all. They have a +5 bonus against all mount types, which is less than what it is in Reforged, but I've also just retooled things so that your cavalry units, if they run into, I don't know, a warg or a melee cavalry unit, you're not going to lose 80% of the unit in about 30 seconds and have that unit rout. So the rebalancing of those bonus templates does go a long way to helping other units not feel quite so one note, and it also will prevent them from routing as fast because they won't take casualties as quickly. So that's nice. And so knight units are not just going to clobber everything all the time, although they will do extremely well because they have higher bonuses than most people, and of course their baseline stats are going to be more at play there than just a massive inflated bonus against cavalry. So worth noting, very high charge bonus there with a bonus of 30. Their morale is very high, and they also buff the morale of nearby cavalry units, so they can make a good support unit as well, help the other cavalry units stand a little bit stronger. But yeah, they're also armed with a lance, so their charge is armor piercing, and then in close quarters they are no slouches, certainly. And then you have the standard siege weapon layout. Now, it's important to note that not everyone is going to have access to every siege weapon. However, the Noldoran factions will have access to all three. They're going to have the trebuchet, the catapult, and the ballista. Some other factions are only going to have a ballista, such as Silmarillion, whereas the Orcish factions are going to have a ballista, and they will not have a catapult or a trebuchet, but they will have the mangonel. And the mangonel is more of a hybrid siege engine, where it's going to have your fire ammunition, which you can't currently switch between this and this fire ammunition and the secondary type right now, but I will find a way to do that for release. But you'll have your fire ammunition which you can use against infantry, and then you'll have a secondary fire which is powerful against buildings. So you'll be able to bring 2 of them. They're going to have less ammunition than, say, the trebuchet here, which is going to have a whopping 10 ammunition, whereas the mangonel is only going to have 5 for each type. That's sort of to balance out the hybrid nature of it. But you will be able to bring more than 1 mangonel, whereas you can only bring 1 trebuchet. So it is a fairly interesting and I think balanced dynamic. And I've altered the prices here of these units just a little bit more to make them a bit more affordable and to fit into the new price scheme that's being used for Silmarillion Total War. One other thing to note is that each of these siege equipment for the Sons of Feanor are staffed by a detachment, that is a half-strength unit of the footmen of Maedhros. So when it comes to being out of ammunition, it's not just a throwaway crew. You didn't just pay 850 for a little bit of ammunition and some siege weapon utility. You do actually have a decent fighting force when you're done there. So in particular, if you're bringing 2, which isn't inconceivable, you'd have one a catapult here for anti-infantry, and then the ballista, which specializes more in being an anti-siege engine. Then you'll have a full unit of the footmen of Maedhros as well. But it's going to be broken into 2 so that you can be a little bit more flexible with your deployment. So yeah, that's going to be the Sons of Feanor. Obviously, the stats for things can vary very much, but I did want to talk a little bit about them because it does kind of explain why stats are the way they are and what the concept of these units are. I mean, the numbers can change, but nonetheless, the concept of those units is going to remain pretty static. I've tried to be very, very thorough and comprehensive in the way that I've designed these factions, so when it comes to like unit roles, then it's not going to alter a whole lot. So more or less, other than the details, I think that you can put a fair amount of stock into this video when it comes to what to expect from the Sons of Feanor and how you're going to be able to play them when you eventually get your hands on them at some indefinite point further on down the line. But yeah, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.